Part 3. War and Why. With Ukraine recovering from an invasion and near economic collapse, the path of progress in rooting out generations of systemic corruption was a hard task and progress was slow. Ukrainians were looking for a new, energetic, and charismatic leader to guide Ukraine into a brave new world. The Thezielinski Era. A comedian from southern Ukraine seemed an absurdly unlikely candidate to run against Poroshenko, but he was exceptionally charismatic and well-liked, especially with Russian-speaking populations. Ironically, the star of a show where a teacher became president of Ukraine after an anti-corruption rant went viral. Due to Zelensky's de-escalation platform with Russia and a desire to make peace, a lot of hardline Ukrainian nationalists saw Zelensky as a horrific option for president and a potential Putin puppet. This resulted in an exceptionally bitter election campaign. While I was not enthused by the prospect of an actor being elected to the highest office in Ukraine, especially after seeing the results of such in the States, I was also unimpressed with the results achieved by Poroshenko. I saw the election between a miniature clown and a big-boned confectionery billionaire as a ridiculous Sophie's choice and figured whatever happened, it would be bad for Ukraine. The internationally monitored election was an absolute blowout, with Zelensky winning about 73% of the vote, the response to which was a calm and peaceful transfer of power as Poroshenko left office. While I figured this would not be the disaster that Poroshenko supporters were predicting, I had little optimism around Zelensky's tenure in office. However, he said something during his inauguration that really touched me and showed there was real substance to the pantless piano player. I really do not want my pictures in your offices, for the president is not an icon, an idol, or a portrait. Hang your kids' photos instead, and look at them each time you are making a decision. While his early presidency was rocky due to being the unfortunate recipient of Trump's perfect call and the absolute delight that is/was the COVID-19 pandemic, his election, in and of itself, was devastating to Russian propaganda and weakened the very foundation of Russian claims against Ukraine. Breaking Russian propaganda. Since there was no legitimate reason for the invasion of Ukraine, Russia had to dehumanize the Ukrainian people to the Russian populace while simultaneously inventing some justifiable reason for war. Common propaganda points, most of which we debunked in earlier videos, include: Ukraine as a nation-state was invented by Lenin and/or Russia. Ukrainians are a subcategory of Rus, and thus should be unified under a Greater Russia, or Ruski Mir. Ukrainian culture, on the whole, is not worthy of existing and should be eliminated. And Ukrainians eat babies. I know that this last one sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it comes up way too often to be just a joke. However, the Kremlin settled on a few points that created adequate anti-Ukrainian hatred in Russia and could be used to rationalize invasion. Ukraine is a war-hungry culture and wants to destroy Russia and Russians. Specifically, Ukrainians have been killing children in the Donbass in attempted Russian genocide. The Ukrainian government is suppressing the will of eastern Ukraine. Ukraine is led by neo-Nazis. It is Russia's responsibility to liberate Ukraine from all of these oppressive elements, and Ukraine wants to abolish Russian language and culture. While Poroshenko was seen as a hardline nationalistic Ukrainian who was fully committed to returning the Donbass and Crimea, thus fitting the Ukrainians' boogeyman mold, Zelensky was a bit different. Zelensky wanted to strengthen and reform the military of Ukraine, but had no plans for direct confrontation with Putin. He wanted to open dialogue and try and end the conflict without escalation. Zelensky spent portions of his youth in eastern Ukraine and had overwhelming support from eastern and southern regions of the country, where Russia has frequently claimed people are being painfully oppressed and they have no voice in the country. Zelensky himself is Jewish. His father had 3 brothers, all of whom perished in the Holocaust. The fact that Russia keeps pushing this Nazi propaganda is beyond disgusting. There is a long breakdown of this topic and why it is bullshit by Adam Something, linked in the description. Zelensky is a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. While natively fluent in both, in his youth he grew up speaking Russian. and in the bulk of his comedy, he also speaks Russian.
Обережно.
In my 9 years of living in Ukraine as a Russian speaker, I have never been discriminated against for speaking Russian. The same is true of the multitude of my Russian-speaking friends who are among some of the fiercest Ukrainian patriots I know. Anyone who is perpetuating the myth that Russian-speaking Ukrainians cannot be patriots, I invite you to tell that to the soldiers in the Donbass, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. So with the overwhelming victory of Zelensky, the peaceful transfer of power, and the continued strengthening of Ukrainian democracy, a lot of Russian talking points were, in theory, shattered. In fact, the claims against Ukraine are so baselessly absurd, I have the sneaking suspicion that the Kremlin is lousy with child-killing fascists who suppress the Russian populace. He said, dripping in irony, why Russia actually invaded Ukraine. So if the tales of Russian genocide and the desire to free the Ukrainian people from tyrannical fascist oppression are bullshit, why did Russia invade? With Putin claiming that the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the biggest geopolitical catastrophes of the 20th century, Russia sees ownership and control of these territories as their God-given right. Severing ties with Russia after the annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass set Ukraine irrevocably on a path towards joining NATO and a potential candidacy for EU membership. The crackdown on corruption meant that Ukraine was no longer a ripe coffer for the Kremlin to pilfer and wash petrol earnings in. Ukraine's continued economic success and growth would be a disastrous signal to other former Soviet republics. Ukraine's military was strengthening, and Ukrainian resolve to chart their own path was assured. The final straw seemed to come with the riots that occurred in Belarus in 2020 following the re-election of Lukashenko, with these protests spreading to Russia itself in 2021. With Ukraine seemingly forever lost to Russian influence, the idea of losing Belarus or a homegrown revolution terrified the Kremlin and would shatter the concept of Russia as the leader and protector of all Slavic people. Ukraine was to be brought to heel through force. A plan was put into motion to envelop the country and crush it with the full might of the Russian army in a terrifying display of Russian power, as Ukraine would serve as an example to those who would defy Russia or step out of line. Russia was to show the world they set the rules, and they are the true might of Europe. What Russia actually believed would happen. Ukraine was a corrupt and broken country that has no culture or history of its own, that is only supported by spineless Western-backed puppets and drug-addled bootlickers with a toy military. Crimea was taken with almost no resistance, and additional efforts to conquer more Ukrainian territory only failed due to Russian restraint and hesitation. Belarus would provide land and air access to northern Ukraine and military assistance if needed with the full strength of Lukashenko's army. Ukraine was almost entirely surrounded by land, sea, and air, with hostile forces in the Black Sea, Russia, Belarus, and Transnistria, ensuring a new age blitzkrieg that military historians would admirably study for generations to come as the massive months-long military buildup was finally unleashed. The planned 48-hour countrywide bombing campaign would cripple Ukrainian air, anti-air, and communication capabilities and would create a wave of terror across the entire nation. Backdoor deals negotiated by the FSB with local-level government heads and military leadership promised Ukraine would surrender without a fight and hand over the keys to Russia on day one. Weak and cowardly leadership in Ukraine would fill jets with cash and flee at the first sign of war, and eventually be delegitimized through propaganda or assassinated outright. Nationalistic elements who would resist Russia are subhuman scum and would be crushed under the superior might of the Veliki Moguchi Rus. Ukraine would be reincorporated into Russian territory as the horrific tragedy that is the collapse of the Soviet Union will be undone. Ukrainian warm water ports, natural and human resources, black soil, and fuel reserves would be Russia's. The boost of adding 35 million people to a failing population that is more and more being replaced with minority groups would help restore Slavic glory. The people of Ukraine would greet Russian liberators with bread and flowers. Kiev would fall in 3 days, and the whole of Ukraine would be conquered in 2 weeks, and a puppet government, likely led by Yanukovych, would be installed. America had proven itself to be leaderless and would certainly not rock the boat by helping Ukraine with anything more than thoughts and prayers, especially considering how accommodating they had been to Russian wishes for the last 4 years and how offensively weak the Obama administration's response was to stealing Crimea. The UK had been self-excised from Europe and had too much Russian money in London to dare rebuff Putin. Plus, British military influence in Europe peaked nearly half a century ago. Global corporations are far too greedy to ever reject the vast Russian market to enforce sanctions on any impactful scale. Germany and France had been subverting Crimean sanctions for years to supply the Russian army with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of vehicles, thermal sights, optics, and munitions, so their continued sabotage of Ukraine in support of Russia could be possible. Germany and the rest of Europe are so hopelessly addicted to Russian gas they would never cut ties with Putin. Allies in Hungary and Bulgaria would champion an aggressive Russia regardless of outcome. NATO was nothing more than a pact in name and would never actually be enforced, and other cowardly homosexual EU countries would never dare defy the great and terrible Mother Russia. Russia would send in their undesirables, consisting of various minority groups from the Caucasus, Siberia, and Central Asia to go in and kill Ukrainians, the benefits of which are twofold. They could ethnically cleanse Russia while purging Ukraine of nationalistic elements. Win-win. If things got really bad, Kazakhstan, India, and China were the ace in the hole to help Russia in a worst-case scenario. The rest of the world is beholden to long-held rules of engagement and civil niceties of the modern world, while Russia is able to break laws, social norms, and rules of engagement without an ounce of remorse or admittance. After all, Russia had never, ever faced consequences for any of its perpetual subversion, espionage, collusion, aggression, meddling, violations, assassinations, invasions, annexations, wars, or lies. Why would this possibly be different? Russia does what it wants with no repercussion. A victory parade would be held in every major city on May 9th, and Ukrainians would celebrate their reunion with Russian power with drunken orgies and medal ceremonies for all involved. A victorious Russia would continue on to Moldova via Transnistria and the Caucasus via Ossetia and Abkhazia, before turning against NATO and the EU itself, reclaiming the Baltics and Poland, and then eventually Finland. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. Russia invades. Instead of delving into the horrors of Russian war crimes, genocidal activity, extreme sexual violence, heightened propaganda and political theater, and a global display of the failure and shortcomings of Russian culture, I will conclude with a post I made in the days prior to the invasion that countered all global intelligence and military analysis that is now proven prophetic. So, I'm still waiting to get that sweet, secret governmental consultancy job offer. Just whatever. February 12th, less than 12 days before invasion. According to several governments, Putin is set on a large-scale invasion and war may be inevitable. However, war with Russia has been a constant threat I have lived with for over a decade now, first in Georgia and now in Ukraine. The Russian regime's goal is to either disrupt or subjugate their neighbors and generally act as bad faith players on the political stage and revel in their self-inflicted role of global pariah. A combination of the total loss of influence over Ukraine, waning influence on its neighbor states, a tremendous drop in approval ratings, the lack of response from turning up heat on several Russian-instigated cold conflicts, a hamstrung Russian economy, internal protests in 2021, 1 million excess deaths since the start of the pandemic, and the fact that all of its major internal scapegoats have been assassinated or jailed spell trouble for Russia. The natives are growing restless, and the oligarch class behind Putin is likely nervous. These are the desperate acts of a madman. I don't know if Putin is delusional or if he's drunk so much of his own Kool-Aid that he believes his propaganda, but Ukrainian's army is not the 5,000 troops strong, corrupt, incompetent, unarmored Soviet relic that it was 8 years ago. Nor are they the illiterate, unmotivated, indifferent sycophants that were steamrolled in Afghanistan. Ukraine is a nation that has awoken and has set itself firmly on the path of self-determination and a European identity. The population is fiercely patriotic and will defend their homeland against increased Russian aggression. This will not be a smash-and-grab victory. This will be a long, bloody, and grueling conflict for both sides. Russia will not win. Russia will not gain in any metric from this conflict. Sanctions will be ratcheted to 11, the ruble will fall, American petroleum production will likely increase, Europe will find gas and oil sources from the Middle East and America, a brainwashed and docile older generation of Russians will not be pleased in seeing their grandsons returning in a pine box fighting against what was once touted as their brotherly neighbor, and the new generation of Russians will also be irate. Those who have only known Russian rule under Putin must be hungry to see what a Russia not led by a KGB dinosaur would be capable of. This will only backfire as they stand to gain nothing. Ukrainians will continue to suffer. The violence of artillery, armored, and aerial bombardments will be indiscriminately directed upon civilian populations, meaning that lives will be destroyed, property, villages, towns will be eradicated or uninhabitable. Meager savings from one of the poorest nations in Europe will be lost. Tens of thousands will be dead, and the EU will have millions of refugees knocking on their door. This will be a humanitarian disaster the Western world has thought impossible for the last 77 years. However, if the EU responds with the strength and determination they should, freeze all Russian money sloshing around banks in London, blacklist oligarchs from travel, and provide adequate military assistance, this would be over before it even begins. I hope that this is just piteous saber-rattling, a petulant child bemoaning the loss of his once impressive status and not the harbinger of war. Ukraine has been given shipment after shipment of the anti-tank weaponry that they have been pleading for years. The winter thaw has begun, and the famous mud and swamps that saved the Soviets from Nazi Germany would be to Russia's detriment. The US, UK, and EU likely have countermeasures lined up, and God willing, the Germans will awaken from their milquetoast obsequious coma and grow the backbone needed to tell Russia off, and hopefully the world actually gives a shit this time and tells Putin to go fuck himself. Personally, I am staying in Ukraine. This is my home. I have grown roots here and hope for a better tomorrow for this nation. There are many who are leaving, and I do not blame them. If I didn't feel a connection to this place, or I thought I had nothing to offer, I would also leave. But for those encouraging me to flee, what would it take for you to abandon your home? You can only take a single suitcase. What would you leave behind? Where would you go? Who would you leave behind? Many people here do not have the luxury of choice. Their fates will be thrust upon them by the evil machinations of a corrupt, dying bully. I am blessed in the fact that I can get out if things get truly bad. Many cannot. What will happen to them? While I am not a man of faith, I pray this ends up being theoretical conjecture, and that I can look back at this and laugh, rather than cry. Time will tell. But for now, my heart and my support are with Ukraine. Hopefully, the rest of the world will follow suit. Slava Ukraini! Less than 12 days later, I was awoken by the sound of bombardment and military aircraft. What's next, and how can I help? The most important thing we can do is maintain a high level of support for Ukraine and provide them with everything they need to break Russia's ability to wage war. Period. Full stop. The end. Military hardware of modern make, financing, political backing, tightening of sanctions, and to not remove a single punitive measure until Russia has unconditionally surrendered and left Ukrainian territory. Not one step backwards, not one concession, not a single compromise. Since the likes of Scholz, Macron, and Modi watching this video are virtually zero, we will keep what can be done to a grassroots level. Engage. Post support, read, get involved, Don't just like an article and add a Ukrainian flag to your profile picture. Hashtag I stand with Ukraine means nothing if you don't actually stand. Go to rallies. If there are none, organize one. 5 to 6 people standing outside of a town hall waving Ukrainian flags in middle America means so much more than you think it does. Get engaged, even on local levels. Educate. While I think my videos are deeply insightful to the conflict, I have my own personal bias that impacts how I see the war. Do not take just my word for it. Make your own opinions, think critically, and share, especially my videos, with friends and family. Give. For those of you interested in financially contributing, please avoid the large big banner charities as they are notorious for ensuring that only a shamefully small percentage of the money actually reaches the people that need it. I have shared a doc in the description with a carefully curated list of charities that can match a cause close to you. Are you an armchair general? Give directly to the Ukrainian military. Are you fiercely LGBT? Then give to Ukrainian LGBT groups. An animal lover? There are plenty of animal rights orgs who desperately need money. Are you a foodie? Give to kitchens and humanitarian groups to help feed those abroad. There are orgs on the ground today who need financial assistance. Find one you like and give $5 or more to one today. There's a link in the description below. If you don't have the money, give a much more valuable resource. Time. Go out and help others. Volunteer. Offer free English lessons to Ukrainian refugees. Support Ukrainian products. Share posts and information. Do not stop. This cannot be a passing cause of the month. This ends only when Russia is soundly defeated militarily and withdraws back to its country, no longer in possession of the tools or capability for offensive war. Better days are coming. It will likely get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. So, until next time, good luck, stay safe, and I love you all. Слава Україні!
Обережно, двері зачиняються. Шановні пасажири, будьте взаємно ввічливими.